Thank you, Hans. And indeed, I'm having a double hat on. I'm at the same time managing the webinar and now I'm presenting. So bear with me. I hope everything goes well, but I think now you should see the first slide of my presentation. Um, First of all, thank you for your kind words, Marius and also Hans. And Marius, it has been a pleasure working with you on this paper. I remember when we first discussed what kind of topics could be of interest for the Friedrich Ebert Foundation, and quite quickly came into this topic and said, okay, I think it's really important to do a study on it, and that the Friedrich Ebert Foundation, with its focus on justice, security, rule of law, would be a perfect partner. So I'm very happy to have seen the study see the light of day in July 2024. I just shared the link in the chat. And now being able to present a slightly updated version of the study in English. So as Hans mentioned, I've been working on this topic of how different European countries, especially Germany and also France, are approaching ISIS returnees for a couple of years now. And today's webinar is kind of an ending point of this work, since I first started off working on the prosecution of returnees, specifically the prosecution of female returnees, and then looking into how they were, from reputation, prosecution, and now rehabilitation and reintegration. So it's kind of a cycle of this life cycle of returnees in some sense. And as I mentioned, there are kind of two studies, slightly different. The first one originally published in German 1.5 years ago already with the Friedrich Ebert Foundation. The reason why we didn't present it at the time is that I was pregnant and had a child, I think, around about the time when the study came out. So we decided to move any kind of presentation a year later when I come back from parental leave, which was the case in September 2025. And then quite quickly, we decided to do a translation into English, just because we saw that the interest in the topic was so enormous. And so I'm very happy to present today an slightly updated study. I updated some of the numbers. I did an additional interview with one female returnee to have that perspective as well. And so on the right, you see the final report that will be published today. And I'm happy to present today the key points. As way of context, we can say that at least 24% of ISIS returnees have been convicted in Germany. And I will not go into much more of the context, but I'm happy to answer any questions regarding those who left, those who returned, ways of return, but that's not the topic of our webinar, and I have to keep the time. So just for your context, we have around 111 convicted individuals. Those are numbers provided by the German government. So the numbers are likely higher since we are now in December 2025. And of those, we have at least 40 convicted women. Just yesterday, we had another conviction of Nadine K. in Koblenz. Also happy to comment on that case, since she is now no longer convicted of genocide, which was quite an interesting development. But these are side issues. So just to give you an idea of how many individuals we're talking about. And of course, I cannot present, I tried when I was drafting the slides, but I cannot, of course, present a report of almost 40 pages. So I thought how to present the topic and also the key findings to you in two ways. So the first one is to offer you what were the key topics that came up when I was doing the interviews. I did 22 interviews with the additional interview with one female returnee recently with various actors from government and civil society in a variety of German states. And these were the key topics that came up and that I used to structure the report. So the first one is offenses and length of imprisonment. So what were they convicted of? How long was imprisonment? and because these are the two factors really influencing the rest of the rehabilitation. Another key topic was risk assessment and management, false compliance, mental health and psychological needs, processing of the crime and disengagement or exit work or tertiary prevention, however you want to call it, children of returnees, transition management after release from prison, probation service reintegration, recidivism, and then something that comes up in all the other topics as well. But I also had an exclusive chapter on that, which means gender-related factors and differences. So I'm not going to go into details, but this is kind of the structure of the report. And what I'm going to do now is to go into 5 key findings that I took from all of these topics, which I thought are maybe the most interesting, or maybe the ones that surprised me, and where I found it's worth sharing them with you without giving a presentation of two hours on this topic. So the major insights from the studies are 5, and I'm going to go through them now with you. So the first insight from my perspective was that, yes, returnees are not that different, and at the same time they are quite different as a target group. So many aspects also apply to extremist offenders. In the report, I go in the beginning into the structure of Germany, how Germany is approaching extremist offenders, just because everything that applies to extremist offenders also applies to returnees. And indeed, when doing the interviews, it was not always easy to differentiate. I had to follow up to ask, are you now talking about a returnee or not? Because many of the topics around security measures, about length of convictions and so on, are quite similar to those targets group, of course. But at the same time, yes, returnees as a target group when it comes to rehabilitation are different. And that's just because they present very complex case constellations. As Amira Benz put it very well, it's the black box IS. So, for example, in exit work, to be able to engage with your client, you kind of have to ask what you could have done differently in that or that situation. Whereas if that person comes from a so-called caliphate, it's kind of difficult to put yourself in their shoes and imagine how that person could have acted differently in that situation. So that's one of the challenges. Another is that, of course, extremist offenders in Germany usually don't have combat experience. They don't experience war in that sense, or at least not all of them. Trauma through loss and living in a war zone, and also disillusionment, which is something that many reports are coming back from ISIS, that this is not something that they envisioned when they first departed there. Also important to point out is that it's only limited possible to compare between men and women in terms of sentences, for example, in terms of convictions and so on, because of the highly gendered roles within ISIS. So I'm going to go into that in more detail later on, but that's why it's kind of difficult to compare the experience of men and women, also in terms of rehabilitation. And since this target group has clearly specific risks, there also exists specific support. Apart from the vast network of different governmental and civil society actors that exist in the different German states, something I find was really good. A good thing to do by the German government is to install so-called returnee coordinators. Also happy to answer some questions about that project. Basically, it's a project that helps the coordination of those who were repatriated. And so those are mostly female returnees and children. And so I think that's a really good idea to coordinate the different actors that are not usually in contact with each other, just because the case of returning children is something so rare. The second key finding that I wanted to share, something that I called many actors, no conductor, and the fact that rehabilitation in Germany really is something that happens decentralized. As many of you might know, Germany has a federal system, which means, very briefly, that it's the states, so the 16 states, that are responsible for justice and security. So, of course, there are guidelines on the federal level. There's a lot of cooperation on federal level. But when it really comes down to it, it's really the state that decides which programs they apply in the justice sector, how they organize their security agencies, how they cooperate with civil society organizations in prison and after prison. So that's why it's a highly decentralized system, which has its pros and cons. And what happened, what I think is important to recognize at this point, is that in the past years, partly because we had so many who left to join terrorist organizations such as ISIS and returned, as well as those who supported Islamist extremism from Germany without having left, we saw comprehensive adjustments on the federal and on state level. We saw new concepts, new regulations, law, new training for the different actors involved with the target group, new cooperation, such as the returnee coordinators. So what many call a patchwork, just because it grew so differently in different states and different areas of Germany when it comes to exit work and rehabilitation, has become much more professionalized. So I think we can now speak of a professionalized patchwork of exit work and rehabilitation. And so this system is much more mature than it has been 10 or 20 years ago, of course. And connected to that point is the important role of German civil society, which is really Germany's unique selling point. And especially in the management of and the rehabilitation of returnees, they have proven how important it is to have a strong civil society that is engaged in exit work and brings this specific expertise, especially organizations that have, in many cases, been in contact with the families of those who left, who had been in contact with the women in the camps and their children. So there, in many cases, there have already been some kind of contact, some kind of relationship that they could build on once the person was back. And I think this is really something to highlight. At the same time, it's sad, I guess, to see that there's still a lack of long-term support. So while the civil society actors are so important and they complement each other with the governmental actors, there is still a lack of long-term funding, which kind of contradicts research findings that exit work and rehabilitation integration are really long-term projects. This is not something that you can manage in 2 years, let's say. So I'm really not sure why we're not funding this in a long-term manner. Third point are two aspects that came up as I was doing the interviews again and again, is that there's still a lot of work to do when it comes to addressing gender and trauma. Regarding gender, one of the key points that was mentioned is how to assess the risk posed by women, female returnees in that case, since risk assessment tools are based on data provided by male extremist offenders. And at the same time, these tools are now increasingly used to assess the risk potentially posed by female extremist offenders, including female returnees. And some factors that might be regarded risk factors for men could be protective factors for women and vice versa. So I think here really there's movement, but I think there still needs to be more work done and more research into this area. Another difference was that there seems to be a tendency that female returnees are benefiting more often from early release after 2/3 of the sentence, whereas male returnees usually stay longer in prison and normally really until the end of their sentence, and then they are released under guidance supervision. And this, of course, poses specific challenges. Also, children is a different factor for many of the women. They mentioned children as the one motivation to participate in the offers that they receive, participate in exit work, participate in the rehabilitation programs that they have in prison and after prison, because they have a strong intrinsic motivation to be in contact again with their children. At least that's what they say, and that's what how they behave. But of course, actors are also cautious to say, well, we are not really sure if that's really their motivation. So here also there's a lot of uncertainty how to evaluate that kind of motivation. And also in social reintegration, you have gender differences in different factors regarding released men and women. When it comes to trauma, it does play a key role. As I mentioned, many have lost relatives while abroad, just living in a war zone, experiencing flight, or living for several years in the camps in northeastern Syria. These are all stress factors that can lead to development of mental health challenges such as trauma, PTSD. Not necessarily, so not all those who come back are necessarily traumatized, but it is something that we're seeing again and again. And at the same time, challenges include that prisons do not always have specific trauma therapy available because it's a specific kind of therapy that you would need. They're not always corporations, though overall there are, of course, offers available. Same time, returnees do not necessarily see therapy as a priority, especially after release, when you have already a multitude of meetings and actors to coordinate and just to get your life back together. So many do not see that therapy would actually be a very good thing for you. So here again, I think we have to have long-term support because this can come up later on in the reintegration process. It's important because experiences from exit work, from disengagement work, demonstrate that trauma can impede disengagement. So if there are serious mental health challenges, they should be addressed before a serious disengagement de-radicalization process can be successful. It seems are the experiences. Fourth key finding I wanted to share is that trust is a good thing, but control is a better one. It's a German saying, Vertrauen ist gut, aber Kontrolle ist besser. I'm not sure if it makes a lot of sense in English, but in German it really brings out one of the points that has been mentioned again and again in the interviews. And that is that one of the key challenges really when rehabilitating returnees is mistrust. Mistrust both from the governmental, but partly also civil society actors, but mostly governmental actors towards returnees, but also from the returnees themselves towards the actors working with them. And I've brought to you two quotes that I find are putting it very nicely. So the first one is from Andre Taubert, whom I interviewed in April 2023. And we were talking about this issue of false compliance because everybody is afraid to do something wrong, to not share information, and that's something that happens, and then they are it's their fault for not having shared that information or for having trusted that person. And so what he said, well, we are actually looking at we should look at it very differently. It's not about if somebody is pretending to engage with us, because nobody, and I quote, nobody comes to exit counseling, where we're talking about disengagement counseling, and says, I want to disengage. We always start with someone who is fooling us. And he continued, it's important to just stay in contact, just, continue the conversation. And then usually at some point there is trust that develops, they open up, and then we can kind of start working with them towards their disengagement and towards rehabilitation and reintegration. But this idea of there is something like genuine interest and this false compliance, that's not really the reality that we see. And I found it really interesting. But here again, I think we need more research to look into that, also in terms of the role of gender when it comes to this false compliance issue. And the second one, and that's closely linked because it's something that was mentioned because of this understanding of what is intrinsic motivation to disengage, or what is the motivation to engage in a conversation, is one probation officer in Lower Saxony reported that one of the returnees said to him that, I quote, "How should I behave? No matter what I do, it's wrong. If I shave off my beard, I'm completely subversive. if I let it grow, it's not right either. So I can't do it right. And this came up in the conversation again and again, this tension between actors working with returnees clearly wanting to do their job well and not risking any security threats, but at the same time, a lack of trust on all levels, so that those who really want to disengage, who show a positive development maybe, are sometimes intention, so that positive developments in disengagement processes, in rehabilitation processes, come to a halt or are even going backwards, just because there's a lot of mistrust and conditions are not eased, for example, because you want to be on the safe side. As I said, trust is a good thing, but control is a better one, especially when it comes to extremist offenders. So I think here really is a key finding that we should reflect on further on. And then 5, to end on a positive note, to say is that overall, I would say that the actors that I interviewed gave reason for cautious optimism. So the first experiences with the rehabilitation of returnees were positive. As I said, it really helped that there were improved concepts and regulations for cooperation. For example, integration of different actors in case conferences that prepare, for example, the transition management after release. It was also mentioned that it's so important, it's this German unique selling point, that governmental and civil society actors complement each other, and that there are cases where this cooperation really works well. Sometimes because there is trust between individuals, sometimes because there are regulations that really make it clear who talks to whom about what when. And finally, also apparently the returnees are accepting services well so far. Again, we have this issue of false compliance, but overall there seems to be a willingness to work and to engage, at least for the great majority. I think that really is a good thing to know. But still, we have some things to do, of course. For example, it was considered helpful to pass on information regarding risk assessment and release dates, so that actors can prepare to do their work. And that's why I think cooperation really needs to be improved. I think that's the eternal topic. And also what I found interesting is that for returnees to have a second chance to really reintegrate after release, you don't only need their willingness to disengage and reintegrate, but you also need society's willingness to give them a second chance and to have trust at some point. And as I said, really, really crucial, mentioned many times, is this need for long-term support for future moments of crisis, because as we know, disengagement processes are not linear. There can be fallbacks, there can be, as I said, moments of crisis. For example, after a loss of a loved one, divorce, separation, new job, many moments where it's crucial to have a phone number that you can call and say, hey, I'm kind of lost. Can we talk? So I think it's really important to have that long-term support. And that's actually the civil society who will provide it. So I'm closing with a couple of policy recommendations. The report has many more. There are a couple in the first pages, and then like a longer list with more detailed information at the end of the report. So very quickly, one is, I mentioned it already, expand cooperation. What has really proven very, very useful are the regulated exchange. So really regulations that say very specifically how cooperation should look like, trust building exercises. Also, I said already, ensure long-term support, which means we need long-term funding, especially for civil society organizations. Rehabilitation plans as a reward system. I'm happy to speak about that in more detail in the Q&A. Also mention that strengthen expertise on gender and mental health, incorporate evaluation and monitoring, because we have some very good experiences now with evaluating exit programs, but there's much less experience with evaluating approaches to returnees, such as the returnee coordinators. And lastly, which I found an interesting point, which is also mentioning in the evaluation reports, is that we need to speak more about what Germany is doing. Because even if we as Germans are very good at criticizing ourselves and saying what is not going well, what we should do better from an international perspective, we're doing quite a good job. I mean, I'm saying this, it's a cautious optimism, but I think it's necessary to speak more about the German approaches because there's a lot of interest from abroad into how we do things. And that's also why I'm especially looking forward now to hear Torben's perspective of